So, you need to test an API and are not quite sure where to start. Testing an API is no different from testing any other software. You need to list the test ideas and then choose the one you want to explore most. If you still haven't seen it, check out the Ultimate Testing Guide video over there. But this video is about APIs, so I'm gonna give you 5 areas for inspiration and exploration. Test errors. This is more important than you might initially think. You really need to make sure that your errors are not leaking any sensitive information like stack traces, that there is a unique ID included in the response to trace this specific error from the client side, that error code matches an RFC for HTTP, and the payload data matches the reality. Have you seen these memes? Don't be this person. Making 200 with the error inside is making everything way more complicated than it should be. Just follow the spec. HTTP codes were invented for reasons. If something is wrong, it has to be explicitly said. 200 means okay, okay? Test performance. API is the foundation of your software. If it's not performing, if it's slow, everything depending on the API will also be slow. Yes, sometimes it's possible to hide it by doing clever UI design, but if everything is slow all the time, it's going to be extremely hard to mask it on the UI. Users will notice and they will be annoyed. Here are some test ideas for you. Measure time of an individual request. Measure time of an individual request during some load. Isolate and measure network latency. What percentage of the total time has been spent inside of an API and just traveling on the network. If I use the Postman to make HTTP call and illustrate it to you, so we send in the request and you can see that it took 952 milliseconds. Look how much time it took just even before the request, this part. It was like 200 milliseconds spent on just a preparation for the request. And out of this request, probably time inside the API was like only this sub box. Network latency is very important for performance. Test middleware. You can think about middleware as a conveyor belt in the factory. When a request is going in, it goes through a series of checks that check it or do something to it, and only then it reaches your controller and then maybe your database. Same happens to the response on the way back. In different languages it could be called slightly differently. For example, in Java it's called filters. Examples of incoming middleware could be checking that this request has a valid access token attached, generating if requires a unique request identifier for tracing purposes, checking that the request has a right payload, right headers attached. Outgoing middleware could be a global exception handler to catch and format all errors in a certain way. Test security. If your API is not secure, you and your company will be in a world of pain really soon, if not already. Some test ideas to consider. Check auth and auth, authentication and authorization. Authentication is a mechanism of checking if you are allowed to talk to the API. Authorization is a mechanism of checking, do you have access to a certain data? Are you authorized to use it? They are not the same thing. You might be authenticated so you can get into the API, but not authorized to access some data, so you're gonna get an error. Or you might be authorized to use the data, maybe it's your data, but you're not authenticated to talk to API properly. HTTPS. I'm not sure if it's worth mentioning in 2022, but using HTTP is not something you want to do. Check there is no leakage of sensitive PII or personally identifiable information through the logs. Names, addresses, passport data, credit card numbers, emails, you name it. All of these has to be protected. Unless you're a security pro or have someone like that in your team, it's worth hiring a security auditing company to do the penetration testing of your API endpoints. Or why not, boss? Do the internal and external audit. Better safe than sorry. Test the contract. This is very important one in my opinion, but often forgotten. A contract is the agreement between a consumer or client and the API itself. They agree to adhere to a certain format of communication, for example, mandatory headers, structure of the payload, for successful requests, for non-successful requests, response codes, and everything else. The ideal scenario is when your API has been created using a contract-first approach. Then you would already have a contract file. It makes it very easy for you to create generated mocked responses to test how the client gonna react to them. Also, contract could be used to generate payloads to test the server or validate the server responses that they adhere to a certain format. In real life, unfortunately, having a contract is not always will be the case, and you will have to first explore and create the contract yourself based on observations. On the bright side, you might find some interesting bugs. If we go and Google the latest Swagger pet store, then you will find a Swagger, the visual representation of the contract. This file right here is a contract we are after. It doesn't look very readable. Let's open it in the IDE. This file describes all endpoints. For example, the put pet endpoint describes all of the possible responses coming from your API, successful or non-successful. A request body is defined here. You can see that it shows what content type is acceptable. Also, it refers to a schema of the pet, defining the body. You can see that pet is an object and it has some properties. Now you know how to test an API. I have chosen the contract testing as one of the most important ones. Don't agree with my opinion? Please leave a comment below. Also, I'm going to leave in the comments below a list of all test ideas that I have prepared while working on this video. And you seem to be interested in testing, so please make sure to check out this video and see you next time.